Hi, my name is Adi, and I would like to thank you for joining me today. When Yakov Kaufman encounters a metal wire, a clothespin, blank page, or discarded scraps of wood and metal, the wheels in his head start turning and his imagination takes flight. He sees a small human figure, usually a man or non-binary character, in each material and remnant. Kaufman, an industrial designer and artist, takes a piece of wood or cardboard and drills an eye, cuts a mouth, twists the hand, strings the bead, and magically a figure emerges. It is first of all a process of anthropomorphism. The goal is to create a figure from almost nothing in minimum steps. This paper explores feminine representation through the practice-led design research of Israeli designer Yaakov Kaufman, which over the last 20 years designed a massive series of more than 2,000 figurines, miniature figurines, made from unprocessed raw materials and functioning as three-dimensional sketches. The figurines are funny, active, almost lifelike friends. They have its own attitude and personalities, and for Kaufman, this research is a practice he uses like a therapy. This is almost automatic, continuous, rough craft making, in which the materials dictate the morphology that produces unusual number of artifacts that can be categorized into families, societies, tribes, groups, either thematically or according to material and technology. However, most of the figurines appear to be non-binary, others appear male, and only a few, about 2% of the total, can be identified as a representation of female. Kaufman uses his practice to explore other other objects and concepts, stools, bows, circles, and more. And it's always repetitive, never-ending investigations led by the material like a pretext to dive deep into other issues generated by them. Kaufman deliberately turned the thing into a figure and then abandoned it to continue on to the next one at that specific moment, thus avoiding gender issues, as he explained, not on purpose. He stops where the magic happens, as he says. In many cases, the figurine takes its own characteristics through the relationship with the rest of the group, the huge index of visual data he created. Kaufman's abstract figurines raise questions about the minimum attributes necessary to represent a character in miniature format. The figurines raise further questions as to what defines a gender and what role stereotypes play in such definitions. A closer look at the series reveals small families that include feminine figures, identified by comparing their characteristics by their participation in the scene. In the lecture, I will present my analysis of several artifacts that can be identified as female. My methodology contains an open interview I conducted with Kaufman and his photographer of the series, Ori Shifrina Navi, because I analyzed the artifacts from his photos. This study is still in progress, and I aim to develop it as one of the chapters of my doctoral dissertation that focuses on Yaakov Kaufman's craft practices, which will contain additional groups. It was not my first interview with Kaufman, but the only one that involved another person. None of us felt very comfortable in that conversation, and my assumption is it because we discussed gender issues at the first time regarding his work, and not because we were threesome. In those figurines, I argue, the designer used the feminine body extrovertedly in order to distinguish it from the rest of the series, since if he did not, they would need external support, a relationship of juxtaposition with other characters within the group, which would rely on a female social role. Few more. Yaakov Kaufman is a leading industrial designer working and living in Israel, whose rich and diverse work is central to the local field. Alongside the mass-produced object he designs, Kaufman is a skilled craftsman, and his commercial industrial work reflects his craftsmanship, while his craft is reflected by his products. He started his career by studying sculpture in an era where the term design was not common in Israel, and went on to found in the late 70s the first department of industrial design in Israel, at Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design, Jerusalem, where he trained 4 generations of designers, and myself included. Kaufman creates from a position of male subjectivity, no doubt about it. But is that the reason most of the figurines are male or non-binary? I argue that the few female figurines earn their gender by few tactics or practices that are not necessarily based in the original plan made by the designer, and recognized 3 categories: direct gesture, figure characteristics, and installation. The last one made by his photographer Shifrin Anavi, who worked by himself without a particular brief. It led to another level of interpretation, in which some of the figurines gained new characteristics, or their existing ones were highlighted as a result of scenes he installed as an art director. Kaufman uses hard and rigid materials in his work, mostly wood and metal, especially aluminum, and sometimes leftovers of cardboard, plastic, and rubber, or maybe a piece of paper or simple found object. And I quote the way he described his work. If I was a potter, sculpting soft clay, then naturally things will be rounder and sexual, and I will sculpt the material more towards the direction of their femininity. But since I use hard and rigid materials cut out from wood and metal, the outcomes tend to be more masculine. I do not engage in adaptation and refinements of things. As they are hewn, so they remain. Maybe like a man. Because my work is hasty, instead of delving into and developing one object, I move on to the next thing. Apparently, this affects the nature and the personality of the characters. In the following part of the lecture, I will give some examples of figurines that have feminine qualities or features. And we'll start with the minimalist figurine on the left, that it's an interesting case of extreme feminine body parts and cancellation of almost the rest of the body, in order to create a woman in minimal lines and actions. It's made of hard wood, characterized by soft round line, while the lower part of the body is very noticeable. Gentle engravings created 2 legs with extreme hips like an icon, a fertility symbol, with plenty of examples in all cultures from ancient times to contemporary popular culture. But note, however, that in this case it's even more radical than what we know. Not only did Kaufman erase the head and the arms, but also the chest, which is also a feminine symbol. However, this figurine is very passive, especially because she has no hands, and I will discuss that issue later again. Another example, even more radical than the other one from that theme, is the figurine with the four balls lying on her side and missing several organs. As Kaufman says, I do not remember if she was planned to be lying down, but apparently there were not enough wires, so that's how it came out. That improvisation led to a figure having one leg and one hand missing, with a very tiny head. All those coincidences and the extension of the four beats representing in red and black the intimate organs created a very sexual figurine, full in the right places, according to the male gaze, of course. She is also a very passive character, not to mention handicapped, without any option to do anything else but lie down like that and present her femininity to the audience. The figurine I will now present was designed as an interpretation of an ancient figurine for Kaufman's latest exhibition installed in Israel Museum, Jerusalem. The reference you can see here in the image on the screen is the only direct gesture to a feminine object in the entire group. At the museum website, it's called Ashdoda, after Ashdod, the city in which it was found, and it described as a figurine of a woman inspired by the seated woman from Greece that may represent a mother goddess. And Kaufman describes his first impression of Ashdoda. It's a figurine they appreciate. It is very special because it's almost a chair, a lounge chair, but at the same time it is still a figure, and you're willing to give up a lot for that. You don't take into account the fact that she has no butt. And that is one of the charming characteristics of small objects. You forgive them, like children. So Kaufman created two interpretations of Ashdoda. The first one, on the right side, seems like work in progress, and the second, more humoristic one, takes the idea and herself less seriously. It's on the left. So the first Ashdoda is made of pine, while the inserts, which functions as legs, are made from bamboo dowels. As Kaufman explained, it represents his interest in the subject of assembled disassembly. The second Ashdoda, on the left, made from two pieces of poplar as the body, while aluminium is used for two new parts, one hand and the footrest that gives it a different identity as compared to the original Ashdoda. In those two interpretations, Kaufman chose to give up the only feminine symbol from the reference, the chest, and his figurines can be perceived as female only if we know about the reference. But on a second glance, the modesty and the shyness of Kaufman's first Ashdoda on the right brings to mind female models from art history, and the passive sitting perceived as more feminine in cultural terms. This figurine is made from 3 slices of pine, 2 legs and a torso. A small stick joins them as the pelvis. The upper part of her body is longer than the legs and very central, thanks to the rounded cut that created a chest. 2 aluminum sticks function as hands in a very open position, and she has also a very tiny head. The wood joint is also a hinge, which allows the figurine to bend forward as if she is going to hug someone. This figurine definitely represents a female, or, more precisely, a mother, one of the traditional social roles of women. Shifrin Anavi contributes to that role by adding a small tripod to the scene as her child. I will go briefly on those another two examples of the same idea, but they are designed in the first place as families, and we can easily notice that few nuances like small curves and height differences mark the female in the groups. And I move on to the last theme. Like the two other figurines I examined earlier, this one is also lying on her side and basically cannot do anything else. It's made from one material, a piece of scratched bounded aluminium, cut very roughly. It has two tiny legs, no heads, and two cuts that created the neck and the head. There are several random engravings to mark eyes, nose, and mouth. Even though roughness is one of the general qualities of Kaufman's practice, it seems that this figurine is at the extreme of the continuum. And it also seems that Shifrin Anavi, the photographer, already has in mind the reference of the reclining woman, the image of Venus, various courtesans, or other symbols from art history. But the roughness made him quote Edward Manet's notorious Olympia, while skipping the classic Venice of Titian, for example, because she is, and I quote, too pure and heavenly to be represented by that piece of metal. So he looked for a figurine that can represent the black woman servant in Manet's painting and added few props to represent the central negative symbols. So I would like to ask if is it the male gaze that created those figurines without any attention to feminine representation? Or are we, as a society, males and females, able to recognize female characters without those signs or references that we already have in our subconscious? Those references contributed to that social construction which apparently did not change much since ancient times. Those questions are too complicated to answer today or in general, but it seems that the cultural construction is stronger than the creators and even stronger than the commentators. However, we can easily recognize common characteristics among the figurines I discussed today. So to conclude, my analysis demonstrated that in the figurines, a small-sized artifact, and in this case also very abstract, female needs obvious breast, hips, butt, or at least must be passive with minimal movement, and even better with physical disability. Tiny head is also a common feature in part of this group. The only figurine that has two hands is a taking care mother, of course. Only few, from 2,000 figurines in total, were reclining, and they were designed either by the designer or the photographer to be females. In the absence of those signs, which are iconics in terms of semiotics, the female needs a male or a child next to her in order to gain her identity as a female. She must be examined in comparison to non-female characters based usually on her social role, which also functions as a sign. Those are universal and natural signs, but is that means it symbolizes universal devaluation of women? I don't know. I assume that the fact it has been made without attention is meaningful, and the designers and artists are social agents that responsible not design only the artifacts, but also design our perception and our society. And that will be it. Thank you very much.